I'm going to share my screen here. Does that look good on your end?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, awesome. All right, good morning. My name is Jane Harrison, and I work for North Carolina Sea Grant as their coastal economics specialist. And I have one of my most fun jobs is that I help to coordinate the North Carolina Oyster Trail. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the tasty adventures that you can take on the trail. And if I pique your interest at all, please do follow us, visit us on our Facebook, our Instagram, as well as our website, ncoystertrail.org, where you can find out about every little adventure that you could take related to North Carolina oysters in our state. And you may think that the only activities available are on the coast, but no, we are actually inland and several different areas, even as far west in the mountains as Cashiers. So with that, what can you do on the trail? So savor the coast's distinctive flavors. This is certainly one of my favorite parts of it. We have restaurants, we have seafood markets, we have Shellfish Farm tours where you can go and eat oysters from the folks that are growing them in our state, that are harvesting them here in North Carolina. And what's really unique about our oysters is they're going to taste differently depending on where they're grown, depending on the water body that they come from. And so what I like to tell folks as well is that you really want to taste the rainbow of North Carolina oysters. So depending on the water body, they're going to have different salt contents, salinity regimes. They eat different things depending on the area. So if they're in an estuarine environment versus closer to the open ocean, you might get notes that are, very briny. Possibly you might have even a little bit of a floral finish. Often I find oysters in our state are quite buttery. They're rich. They're fatty in a great way, and some oysters are very earthy. They might have a mineral flavor, or perhaps even an umami finish. So kind of that mushroom, full body flavor that I really love with oysters. And so once you taste the rainbow of our oysters, then I will grant you permission to try oysters from other places and really become a connoisseur, because there's so many amazing oysters across the country and the world. Other things that you can do on the trail, as I mentioned, is tour a shellfish farm. So a shellfish farm is quite a unique operation in our waters. And so I'm guessing most of you have been on some kind of a land-based farm. Either you've got your own little garden in the backyard growing tomatoes and basil, or you've done a strawberry U-pick, or even worked on a farm growing up. But I'm guessing not too many of you have seen what farming looks like on the water. And so these are really neat experiences. Oftentimes you get out on a boat. You don't always get in the water, but sometimes that's an option. And so the way that oyster farming works is these farmers, they're putting seed out in these cages, in these bags, and they're growing the oysters. So really, they're not taking anything from the wild oyster populations. They're, bringing new oysters into our kind of our possibilities. So this is just such a neat, aspect of the trail. And when you go to our website, we have an interactive map, and you can choose Shellfish Farm tours, and you can find one near your area.
868.
So what exactly is going on with farmed oysters? What I want to show you here with this graph is, in the last decade, we have seen an exponential rise in the number of oysters being produced through these farming methods. And so even in just the last year, from 2020 to 2021, where we have our latest data, we saw that farmed oysters, they doubled in production in terms of number of bushels. And so we're very hopeful that we're going to continue to see this upward trajectory in farmed oysters. And so when I think about, what's going on, especially with oyster farming in our state, what we're truly doing is supporting sustainable seafood. So we have had declines in wild stocks over the years, both in our state, our country, globally, and aquaculture. So farming in water is one of the ways that we can bring more seafood protein to us. And especially oyster farming is incredibly sustainable because the oysters have such environmental benefits. So oysters, they're filter feeders. They provide, food for both us, for other organisms, and when they're in the wild, they actually, are going to provide habitat as part of wild oyster reefs for spawning crustaceans, fish, finfish. And so the oyster farming approach, is really just an opportunity to reduce some of the pressure on our wild stocks. Now, at the same time, I want to be able to eat wild oysters. And just so y'all know, you can eat those starting in October. October 15th is when the wild oyster season starts. It ends typically sometime around March or April, but you can eat farmed oysters all year round. So when folks tell you, hey, you can only eat oysters in the R months, well, that depends. If we're talking about farmed oysters, again, those are available all year round. But in terms of bringing our wild oyster stocks back, I do have this graph that, it's a bit sobering when we look at the numbers, what's been going on with wild oyster stocks, or at least the harvest rates. So we have had declines in wild oysters since the 1800s. And even in the last decade, we've seen some major declines. And so just last year, again, in 2021, that was when farmed oysters actually surpassed wild oysters in terms of harvest. So I'm hopeful those farmed oysters are going to continue to go up, but I want to see our wild oyster numbers go up as well. So one of the aspects of the trail that I really want to emphasize is that you can be a part of the coastal solution. So we have many education organizations that are on the trail, organizations that provide volunteer opportunities to protect our coast, to restore our coast, to put in living shorelines, oyster sanctuaries. You see this, wild oyster bed here in the foreground. We need more of this. And so the trail isn't just about, eating the oysters we have. It's also about bringing back the oyster populations that we once cherished. So if you have any questions, do get in touch with me. If you'd like to be part of the trail, you'd like to check out the trail, definitely see our website. The North Carolina Oyster Trail is administered in partnership by 3 groups. So North Carolina Sea Grant, where I work, and we do coastal research, outreach, and education. Then the Coastal Federation, so they are a nonprofit organization focused on protecting and restoring our coastal habitat. And then finally, the North Carolina Shellfish Growers Association, which makes up our industry partners, so all the folks that are involved with shellfish farming. And with that, I will end. Thank you.